A judge mocks a homeless black elderly man in court, laughing as the crowd looks away in shame. But just when she thinks it's over, the sound of engines shakes the walls. The doors burst open, and 50 Hell's Angels walk in, one by one, filling every seat in the courtroom. They're not here for trouble. They're here for him, the man she just humiliated. Turns out, years ago, this homeless old man saved their lives, and now they've come to return the favor. As the judge's arrogance turns to fear, one truth begins to surface. He's not just any man. He's the hero her own father once wronged. And when corruption, faith, and redemption collide, a whole town will be forced to decide what justice really means. Because in a world that forgot mercy, what happens when grace rides in on 2 wheels? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The courthouse in Sterling Falls smelled like old paper and cold coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, and the air carried that strange mix of tired hope and quiet judgment that always filled room 12B. Judge Meredith Sloan sat tall behind her bench, wrapped in her black robe like armor. Her eyes, a sharp gray, scanned the courtroom as if daring anyone to waste her time. Outside, the January wind howled against the glass. Snow swirled through the streets, piling along the steps where a few shivering people waited for their hearings. Among them stood an old man with a torn army coat and a cane made from a broken broom handle. His name was Reverend Elijah Carter, though most people called him Doc. His beard was white and thick, his eyes soft and tired. He'd spent the night under the church steps, curled beneath cardboard and prayer. When the bailiff called his name, Elijah rose slowly. His knees ached with every step. The chains on his wrists rattled faintly as he shuffled to the defendant's table. He wasn't dangerous, just old and poor, but the system didn't know the difference. Judge Sloan looked down at him. "Mr. Carter," she said, tapping her pen, "you're charged with trespassing on church property. This is your 3rd offense in 2 months. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Elijah's voice was gentle, like an old hymn. "Your Honor, I was just trying to get warm. It was below freezing. I meant no harm." The judge leaned back, unimpressed. "So the law doesn't apply when it's cold? You think the rules are optional for you?" A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. The public defender, a young woman with kind eyes, whispered, "Your Honor, my client—" Meredith cut her off. "Your client is a grown man. He can speak for himself." Then, with a faint, almost mocking smile, she said, "Perhaps if you put as much effort into finding a job as you do finding excuses, you wouldn't be here." The room went silent. Elijah didn't flinch. He simply looked down, folded his weathered hands, and said softly, "Ma'am, I used to have one. Saved lives even. But no one wants an old medic anymore." Something flickered across her face, but she brushed it aside. "You'll pay a fine or serve 2 days in county. Case closed." The gavel struck like a hammer. A soft gasp came from the benches. A woman in the back whispered, "That's not right." But Meredith ignored it, flipping to the next case. To her, it was just another morning. Elijah was let out, his shoulders bowed but his dignity still somehow intact. As he passed the judge's stand, he paused just long enough to say, "I'll pray for you, ma'am." The words, calm and kind, hit her like a stone she didn't see coming. That afternoon, Meredith walked briskly to her car, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She tried not to think about the old man's voice, but it followed her like a ghost. By the time she got home to her quiet townhouse, the sky had turned to slate, and her phone was buzzing with messages. She ignored the first few, then glanced at one. Viral. Judge mocks elderly black veteran in court. The video thumbnail showed her pointing down at the man, lips tight, eyes cold. Her stomach dropped. She clicked it open and watched herself say the words again. Sharp, smug, thoughtless. The comments below were brutal. People called her heartless. Some called for her resignation. Others demanded justice for the hero judge humiliated. Meredith slammed the phone face down on the table. "People don't understand context," she muttered, but her voice shook. She poured herself a glass of wine, staring out at the snow. The city lights flickered through the frost, lonely and far away. On her bookshelf sat an old photo of her father in his judge's robe, the man she'd spent her whole life trying to impress. His words came back to her now, hard as gravel. A judge must never show weakness. Justice is about order, not feelings. Maybe he was right. Maybe mercy really was weakness. Still, when she tried to sleep, she kept seeing that man's eyes. Not angry, not bitter, just sad. The kind of sadness that comes from carrying too much pain for too long. The next morning, the courthouse was busier than usual. Reporters waited outside with cameras. The bailiff whispered, "There's a crowd today, Judge. Folks are still talking about yesterday." Meredith sighed, pretending not to care. She took her seat at the bench, smoothing her robe, ready to face another long day. Then came the sound, low and distant at first, like thunder. The floor vibrated. People turned toward the windows. Engines, dozens of them. The courtroom doors burst open. 50 men and women in leather jackets and denim vests walked in, silent but steady. Their boots echoed on the tile. Patches glinted on their backs. Hell's Angels. Meredith froze. "What is this?" she demanded, though her so-tort voice came out thinner than she meant. One of them stepped forward, a tall man with a red beard and kind eyes. He spoke calmly, his tone steady as stone. "We came to see the man you mocked yesterday." The bailiff moved to block him, but the man raised a hand. "We don't want trouble, ma'am. We just want you to know. He ain't no bum. He's a war medic. Saved half our club after a wreck 10 years back. Didn't ask for a dime." The room went dead quiet. Meredith looked down at the case file before her. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through it, scanning for something, anything, to disprove what she'd just heard. The man continued softly. "That old man patched us up with nothing but a torn t-shirt and faith. We ain't here for violence. We're here for respect." Then, one by one, the riders filled the benches. No one spoke. The judge, the crowd, even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. For the first time in her career, Meredith Sloan didn't know what to say. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, everything had changed. The courtroom held its breath. Snow tapped the high windows. The riders had filled every bench, leather creaking as they settled. Their jackets showed patches and road-worn scars, but their faces were calm. No one shouted. No one moved fast. It felt like church, only the hymns were silent and made of engines. Judge Meredith Sloan tightened her grip on the gavel. Her mouth felt dry. "State your purpose," she said, voice clipped. "This is a court of law." The tall man with the red beard stepped forward one pace. He stood straight, hands open so the bailiff would not panic. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We came for the man you mocked, the homeless black elder, the medic. We call him Doc." A low murmur rolled across the room. The public defender glanced at Meredith, then at the riders, then at the old, empty chair where Elijah had sat the day before. The red-bearded man kept his tone even, almost gentle. 10 winters back, our club got hit on Highway 7. Black ice, Bikes down, bodies everywhere. That old man, Doc, crawled from car to car, from man to woman, hands red and steady, breath like smoke in the cold. He ripped his own shirt to stop the bleeding. He prayed over us while the sirens wailed. He saved us. He saved me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth did the heavy lifting. Meredith felt the eyes of the room pressing up at her bench. She drew a hard breath. "This is not a hearing on past events," she said. "This is not a forum for—" A woman rider stood from the third row. Her hair was silver and long, braided under a worn cap. "With respect, Your Honor," she said. "We're not here to argue law. We're here to stand behind a man who stood behind us when the world drove past." The bailiff shifted his weight, unsure. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys, waiting. The red-bearded man nodded toward the benches. On aisle Q, 2 riders stepped into the aisle carrying a scuffed metal box. They placed it on the prosecution table without touching a single officer. One rider opened the lid slowly and pulled out a stack of laminated photos in clear sleeves. The bailiff moved closer. "What is that?" "Memories," the man said. "Proof." He lifted the top photo. It showed a highway at dusk, lights flashing in a blur, people crouched in cold wind. In the center knelt a thin, bearded figure in a torn coat, hands pressed to a man's side, mouth set firm. Another photo showed the same old man wrapping a bandage made from a split t-shirt. Another showed him standing back while EMTs lifted a stretcher, his face tired and kind. The man passed the stack to the bailiff. "Give them to the judge," he said. Meredith didn't reach at first. Her stomach churned. Still, she nodded. The bailiff brought the photos to her bench. She took them with stiff fingers and looked down. There he was, the same old man from room 12B. Younger by a decade, but those same eyes, same quiet, careful hands. In one photo, he held a biker's head steady and whispered something. She couldn't hear it, but she could almost read the shape of a prayer. Her throat tightened. The public defender stood. "Your Honor, may I speak plainly?" Meredith blinked. Briefly. "My client is not a nuisance," the defender said. "He is a veteran with a Bronze Star. He is a pastor to the streets. He trespassed because he was trying not to freeze to death." She pointed to the riders. "These people came because he once kept them alive with nothing but faith and a torn shirt. The court can show mercy without losing order." Silence followed the words. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum more softly. Meredith laid the photos down and straightened in her chair. The hard shape of her father's voice rose inside her. Order, not feelings. Never bend. She lifted the gavel. "This court will not be interrupted by displays," she said. "I will clear this room if—" A different voice came from the back, old and mild. "No need for that, Judge." Everyone turned as the courtroom doors eased open again. A priest in a simple black coat stood there, hat in his hands. He looked as if he had walked out of the snow and straight into a moment he had long expected. The bailiff frowned. "Identify yourself." "Pastor from St. Matthew's," the man said. "The church basement where Doc was found. We never pressed charges. We called for help because we were worried about him. The boiler failed that night. The room turned colder than the steps." He stepped forward and held out a folded letter. "This is a signed statement from our church board. If the court wants it, we request leniency. More than that, we request respect." Meredith stared at the letter but did not take it. Something inside her pushed and pulled at the same time. She fought to keep her face still. "This docket is not the place." The red-bearded man's voice came again, warm as a hand over a candle. "Ma'am, we will sit down now. We won't shout. We won't block the doors. But we ain't leaving him alone anymore." A rustle of jackets followed, as all 50 riders sat at once, like a choir taking the pews. Their presence filled every empty space without a single raised voice. The judge, for the first time in years, felt small on the high seat. She turned to the clerk. "Call the next case," she said, but the words sounded thin and wrong. Her eyes flicked to the photos again, then to the old priest's steady face, then to the rider's quiet, waiting stares. The clerk hesitated. "Your Honor," Meredith swallowed. "Court is in brief recess," she said abruptly, tapping the gavel too fast. 10 minutes. She stood and walked out through the side door to chambers, the gavel still in her hand. The door shut behind her with a soft click, and the hum of the courtroom dropped away. Inside her small office, the heat hissed and the clock ticked. She set the gavel down and braced her hands on the desk. Her reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger. Black robe, neat bun, hard mouth. Her chest rose and fell as if she had run up a hill. The door opened a crack. Her clerk slipped in and closed it again. "Judge," he said softly, "do you want water?" She nodded, and he set a paper cup on the desk. When he turned to leave, she stopped him. "Who is the man with the red beard?" "Locals call him Big Red," the clerk said. "Runs the chapter. Keeps the peace, believe it or not." Meredith stared at the photos on her desk. "They brought proof." "Yes, Your Honor." She sipped the water, but it did nothing for the knot in her throat. "Schedule a status hearing on the trespass case," she said. "I want—" She caught herself, the word mercy flaring in her mouth like a match. "I want complete records, service history, medical, everything we can legally obtain." "Yes, Judge." He left. She stood alone again, listening to the clock. Her phone buzzed. A flood of messages lit the screen. Links, headlines, camera stills from the hallway. She didn't open them. She already knew what they would show. A courtroom filled with 50 riders sitting like sentries, and a judge who looked smaller than her chair. She pressed her palms to the desk until the wood bit her skin, then lifted them. The gavel sat where she had left it. She placed the top photo beside it. Elijah kneeling in the cold, hands steady, eyes gentle, and stared until the edges blurred. A soft knock came. The bailiff's voice filtered through the door. "Your Honor, recess is over." She took one long breath, then another. She lifted the gavel, squared her shoulders, and walked back into the light. The riders rose as one out of respect, not defiance. The priest stood near the back. The public defender waited with calm eyes. The room felt different now, like the air had been washed. Meredith sat. She did not look at the cameras. She looked at the people who had come to stand for a man who had once knelt to save them. "This court," she said, voice steady at last, "will reconvene." And though she did not say it out loud, a new sentence formed inside her like a prayer she had never learned. Do right. Start now. She nodded to the clerk. "Call the case." Outside, the engines cooled under falling snow. Inside, the room warmed by a few degrees, as if Grace itself had cracked a window open. The snow outside kept falling, turning Sterling Falls into a quiet, white painting. Judge Meredith Sloan sat alone in her office long after court had adjourned. The riders had left in an orderly line, their engines rumbling into the dusk like distant thunder. She had watched them go from her window, their taillights glowing red against the snow until they disappeared down Main Street. Now, the courthouse was silent. Only the ticking of the old wall clock kept her company. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the gavel on her desk. It didn't feel like authority anymore. It felt like weight. Her phone buzzed again, relentless. News outlets, emails, texts from colleagues. She finally opened one message from a friend in the district attorney's office. "You're everywhere. The clip's gone national. They're calling you the Heartless Judge." Meredith closed her eyes. The words hit harder than she wanted to admit. She clicked open the video again, just to understand what everyone was seeing. There she was, cold, dismissive, looking down her nose at a frail old man who'd done nothing but ask for warmth. In the background, someone gasped softly when she struck the gavel. The camera caught Elijah's gentle reply. "I'll pray for you, ma'am." It was only 5 words, but they replayed in her mind like a song she couldn't turn off. She shut the phone off, stood, and crossed to the window. Down below, the courthouse steps were still littered with footprints. She could see where the riders had stood earlier, clustered in the cold, their jackets black against the snow. She had seen anger in her courtroom before, plenty of it. But what she'd felt from them wasn't anger. It was love. Fierce, loyal, unashamed love for that old man. And she, in her robe and authority, had mocked him. She reached for her coat. 10 minutes later, her car's headlights cut through the snow as she drove across town. She didn't know where she was going until she found herself near the overpass. Under the bridge, near a stack of cardboard boxes and a half-burned barrel, a small group of men huddled around a weak fire. Meredith parked across the street and watched from the shadows. The old man was there. Elijah Carter. Even in the dim light, she recognized him by his posture, calm and straight, as if dignity itself kept him upright. He handed a steaming cup of soup to another man. Then, sat on an overturned crate and began to hum. The tune drifted softly into the night. It wasn't any song she knew, but it was soothing and sad, like a prayer without words. She sat in her car for a long time, engine idling, snow collecting on the windshield. She wanted to get out, to walk over and say something, anything, but shame pinned her still. Finally, she whispered to the dark, "I'm sorry." The heater hummed. The old man laughed gently at something one of the others said. His voice carried across the street like a warm wind in the cold. When she got home, she poured herself another glass of wine and sat at her kitchen table. She opened her laptop and searched his name. Elijah Carter. The search results surprised her. Dozens of mentions appeared in old newspapers and charity newsletters. Retired medic organizes food drive for veterans. Former Army chaplain leads street ministry. Bronze Star awarded for battlefield bravery, 1970. Meredith scrolled through the pages, each headline stabbing deeper into her pride. The man she'd dismissed as lazy had built his life on service and sacrifice. She rubbed her eyes. On her bookshelf sat her father's old law journals. She pulled one down, the leather worn soft by years of his use. Inside the front cover, in his neat handwriting, was a quote he had always lived by. "Justice without mercy is tyranny." She laughed bitterly. "You never believed that, Father." But maybe he'd written it for himself, and failed to live it out, just as she had. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she didn't ignore it. It was the young public defender from earlier that day, Rachel Kim. "Judge Sloan," the message read, "there's something you need to see, about Elijah Carter." Curiosity pricked through her exhaustion. Meredith replied, "Email it." A minute later, a PDF arrived. Medical and service records, Elijah J. Carter. She opened it slowly. Decorated field medic, Bronze Star, multiple commendations, 20 years of community work after discharge, founder of Carter Street Veterans Shelter. Her heart sank when she reached the last page. The shelter's address was on the same block as a condemned property currently tied up in a redevelopment case. one she herself had ruled on just 6 months ago. The developer listed? Carl Dunstan. Her hands trembled as she shut the laptop. She had mocked a man her father had once wronged, then unknowingly helped the same kind of man destroy what little he had left. The next morning, Meredith didn't drive straight to the courthouse. She parked near the Veterans Shelter instead, a crumbling old church building on Carter Street. A hand-painted sign hung by the door. If you have nowhere else to go, you're home. Inside, the air smelled of soup and detergent. A few men nodded to her, polite but surprised. Then Elijah came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He stopped when he saw her. "Judge Sloan," he said quietly. "Didn't expect to see you here." I wanted to apologize," she said. The words felt heavy. "I spoke out of pride. I didn't know who you were." He smiled faintly. "Doesn't matter who I am. Matters who you choose to be." She blinked hard, holding back tears. "You're not angry?" "No," he said simply. "Anger don't build anything." They stood in silence for a long moment, the smell of soup and wood smoke between them. Then he handed her a ladle. "If you came to talk, you can stir while you do it." She almost laughed. "You're putting me to work?" He chuckled. "Everybody works here, even guests. Keeps the spirit warm." So she stirred. Slowly, awkwardly, she helped him serve lunch to a line of veterans and widows. Some recognized her from the video, but no one said a word. They just smiled when she handed them a bowl. When the line was done, Elijah poured himself a cup of coffee and sat with her at a worn wooden table. "Sometimes," he said, looking at the rising steam, "God humbles us before he heals us. Makes sure the cracks are open so the light can get in." Meredith swallowed the lump in her throat. "Maybe that's what this is then," he nodded. "Maybe so. You keep showing up, and the rest will come." When she left that day, snow was falling again, but it didn't feel quite so cold. She looked back once and saw Elijah standing in the doorway, waving with his mug in hand. For the first time in years, the judge smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the court, but for the simple feeling that maybe, just maybe, she could start over. The next morning, Sterling Falls woke under a pale, wintry sun. Snow glistened on the courthouse steps like sugar, softening the hard edges of the town. Inside, Judge Meredith Sloan sat through a long and restless meeting with the mayor and city attorney. The video from her courtroom had spread everywhere now. Local news, national talk shows, even church newsletters calling her the woman who mocked a hero. She tried to keep her face composed as the mayor, a brisk woman named Evelyn Briggs, laid out the situation. "Public opinion is brutal," the mayor said, tapping her pen. "We can't fire you, but we need to do something. You'll volunteer at Carter Street Veterans Shelter, the one he founded." "Community service?" Meredith said, almost in disbelief. "Call it outreach," the city attorney replied. "It looks good for the cameras. You help the shelter, we show the city you care, and everyone moves on." Meredith stared at the folder they handed her. The words, "Carter Street Veterans Shelter," printed in bold. She'd been there yesterday. She'd seen Elijah's calm eyes, the way he forgave her without hesitation. And now she was being sent there as punishment. She sighed softly. "Fine," she said. "I'll do it." But inside, a quiet, uneasy warmth stirred, something close to hope. That evening, she parked outside, the shelter again. The building stood like a tired soldier, its bricks worn and chipped. But warm light glowed from the windows, and she could hear laughter from inside. The painted sign out front still said, "If you have nowhere else to go, you're home." Meredith hesitated at the door. She wasn't used to walking into rooms without authority behind her. She was used to people standing when she entered, not smiling. But she took a breath, squared her shoulders, and pushed the door open. Inside, the smell of stew and soap greeted her. Men and women sat at long tables, sharing bowls of soup. A few looked up and froze when they recognized her from the viral video. She saw whispers and side glances, but no hostility, just curiosity. Elijah appeared from the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, towel draped around his neck. When he saw her, his eyebrows lifted slightly, but his smile came easy. "Judge Sloan," he said, "didn't expect you back so soon." "Apparently," she said a bit awkwardly, "the city decided I should help." He nodded, amused. "The Lord works in mysterious paperwork." A few people laughed. The tension in the room eased. Elijah handed her a ladle and pointed toward the serving counter. "Well, if you're here to help, soup's on." She blinked. "You want me to serve?" He grinned. "Yes, ma'am. You look like you could use some humble pie first." So she took her place behind the counter. Her first few bowls spilled over. Her hands trembled. But soon, the rhythm came. A scoop, a smile, a quiet, "You're welcome." Some of the residents thanked her softly. Others just nodded. And with each bowl, something in her chest loosened. When the line ended, Elijah leaned on the counter beside her. "You handled yourself fine," he said, even smiled once or twice. She smirked faintly. "It's easier without cameras," he chuckled. "The truth usually is." They sat together after dinner, the sound of dishes clinking in the background. Meredith watched the people around her, men joking softly, women folding blankets, a few children playing cards in the corner. "You built all this?" she asked. He nodded. "Started small. Me and a few vets. Folks gave what they could. Some nights all we had was soup and prayer, but it kept folks alive. That's enough for me." She looked down at her hands. "You could have told me who you were in court." "I didn't need to," he said gently. "I knew who I was. The real question was, did you?" His words landed deep. She didn't answer. When it was time to leave, she pulled on her coat and hesitated at the door. "Thank you for letting me help," she said quietly. Elijah smiled. "Thank you for showing up." The drive home was long and silent. Snowflakes drifted through her headlights. For once, she didn't turn on the radio. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, but her mind was miles away, in a soup kitchen filled with warmth and laughter. She parked outside her townhouse and sat there a moment. Her reflection in the window didn't look like the cold, proud judge she'd seen before. Her face was softer somehow. Tired. Yes, but human. She went inside and placed her robe over the chair instead of hanging it neatly. Then she opened her laptop. A dozen new news articles waited in her inbox, her image frozen mid-gavel, mouth sharp, eyes cold. She clicked one headline. Judge Sloan's second chance? The photo showed her handing out bowls of soup at the shelter, captured by someone's phone camera that evening. She stared at the picture. She looked awkward, but sincere. For the first time, the story didn't make her angry. It made her wonder. The next morning, she arrived at the courthouse early. Her clerk looked surprised to see her smiling. "Good morning, Judge." "Good morning," she replied, hanging up her coat. "We'll start with Mr. Carter's file today." He blinked. "You mean the homeless case?" "I mean Reverend Carter," she corrected softly. As she reviewed the file, she found something that stopped her cold. A deed transfer document, dated 20 years ago. The property listed had once belonged to Elijah and Mary Carter. The legal signature at the bottom belonged to her late father, Judge Harold Sloan. Her breath caught. She sat very still, staring at the familiar signature. So that's what he meant. You think the rules are optional for you? Her father's ruling had stripped Elijah of his home decades ago, and now she, his daughter, had humiliated the man in court. The room seemed to spin. She closed the folder slowly, whispering, "Oh, God." Outside, the bells of St. Matthew's Church rang for the noon hour. Their sound filled the air like forgiveness trying to find its way in. Meredith pressed a hand over her heart. "I'll make this right," she murmured. "I don't know how yet, but I will." And deep down, she knew that was the true beginning of her redemption. The following week, winter pressed harder on Sterling Falls. The wind cut sharp through the streets, rattling window panes and whistling under door frames. The courthouse stayed warm with its polished floors and humming heaters, but every time Judge Meredith Sloan sat behind her bench, she found herself thinking about the drafty shelter on Carter Street. 3 evenings a week now, she drove there after work. No reporters followed her anymore. The story had moved on, but her need to make things right hadn't. When she walked in that Monday night, Elijah was at the back of the hall, fixing a broken window with a patch of cardboard and duct tape. His breath fogged in the cold air. "Evening, Judge," he said, smiling over his shoulder. "Evening, Reverend," she replied, shrugging off her coat. She had stopped correcting him when he called her Judge. It felt strange, but also like a piece of who she used to be, something that might yet be redeemed. He handed her a roll of tape. "Hold that steady, would you?" Together they pressed the cardboard over the frame. The tape squeaked as it sealed. When they stepped back, she rubbed her gloved hands together. "That's a temporary fix," he nodded. "Most things are until love makes 'em last." His words hung in the air for a moment, gentle but true. That evening, the shelter was busier than usual. A blizzard warning had gone out, and every bed was full. Meredith helped serve stew, then fetched extra blankets from the supply closet. She didn't mind the work anymore. There was something steady and grounding in it. Something she'd never felt in her courtroom. Between tasks, she noticed a wall of old photos taped near the office door. She moved closer to study them. There were pictures of veterans, families, and community dinners. In one photo, a much younger Elijah stood beside a smiling woman holding a newborn baby. Elijah appeared beside her. "That was Mary," he said softly. "My wife, and our daughter, Anna. Both gone now." "I'm sorry," Meredith whispered. He nodded, eyes distant. "Mary died in a fire. We lost the house before that. The land was taken for a new development. I told her not to worry, said justice always finds its way home, but it never did." Meredith's throat tightened. She couldn't look at him for a moment. "Was the ruling local?" "Yes," he said. "Your father's name was on the papers, but that's long past, child. The Lord has already judged my case." She froze, eyes wide. He didn't seem angry, only tired. "You knew?" she asked, her voice trembling. He nodded gently. "I saw your last name the first day you came in. Didn't need a news report to tell me who you were." "Then why didn't you say anything?" He smiled faintly. "What good would it do? You can't heal old wounds by reopening them. You do it by living better today than you did yesterday." Tears burned behind her eyes. She wanted to speak, to explain, but words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded and whispered, "Thank you." He patted her shoulder. "You don't owe me thanks. Just keep showing up." Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the last guest had gone to bed, Meredith sat with Elijah by the fire in the small chapel area. The flames flickered softly, and shadows danced on the walls. "Reverend," she said, "do you ever lose faith?" He poked the fire with an iron rod. "Every man does, even preachers. What keeps you believing?" He smiled. "I remember what's been done for me. Even in the mud, even when I was bleeding, there was light somewhere. Sometimes it came through people who didn't even mean to help me. Meredith looked into the fire. I've spent so long trying to be right that I forgot how to be good. Then you're halfway to wisdom, he said. She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. The next day at the courthouse, Meredith caught herself defending a homeless defendant with unexpected compassion. She granted him probation instead of jail, recommending community work at the shelter. The courtroom fell silent at her change of tone, but she didn't care. She wasn't doing it for approval anymore. At lunch, her clerk raised an eyebrow. You're different lately, Judge. People are talking. Let them, she said, stirring her coffee. Maybe it's time they see mercy as part of justice. By the end of the week, the blizzard hit hard. Sterling Falls shut down under sheets of white. The shelter lost power for a few hours, and Meredith stayed late to help light candles and hand out food. She laughed with the others when the soup turned lukewarm, and no one complained. When the power finally came back on, she found Elijah by the window, looking out at the swirling snow. We made it, she said, smiling. He nodded. Storms pass. Always do. She looked at him, noticing how the firelight glowed against his silver hair. How do you stay so calm through everything? He looked at her, eyes kind. You can't stop the wind, child, but you can build a wall around your heart, or a fire inside it. I chose the fire. Her eyes stung again, but this time from something warmer than sorrow. She didn't realize how late it was until she saw the clock. I should go, she said, reaching for her coat. Take a blanket, he said, handing her one folded by the door. You'll need it if your heater gives out. You can bring it back next time. She smiled. Next time, she repeated, as if the words themselves promised healing. When she finally drove home, the roads were silent, blanketed in snow. She wrapped the borrowed blanket around her shoulders while the car warmed up. The wool smelled faintly of wood smoke and peppermint soap. As the tires crunched through the snow and the town lights shimmered faintly ahead, she whispered to herself, "Keep showing up." It became a kind of prayer, and for the first time in her adult life, Judge Meredith Sloan found comfort not in power, but in purpose. The snow began to melt in Sterling Falls, leaving behind slush and muddy sidewalks. The cold still bit in the evenings, but the sunlight lingered longer now. Each day after work, Meredith Sloan returned to the Carter Street Veterans Shelter. What started as punishment had become habit, something she looked forward to more than she wanted to admit. The shelter had grown busier. More people came seeking warmth, meals, and sometimes just company. Meredith helped with paperwork and grant applications, while Elijah handled the day-to-day care. She noticed how everyone looked to him, not with fear or formality, but with love. Even the hardest men softened around him. One Wednesday afternoon, Meredith arrived to find Elijah sitting at his small wooden desk, papers spread out in front of him. His glasses slid down his nose as he squinted at a form. "Can you read this fine print, Judge?" he asked, passing her a paper. "My eyes ain't what they used to be." She took it and frowned. "It's a notice from City Hall. They're planning to inspect the property. That's unusual." He nodded. "They came by last week too. Said something about a redevelopment proposal. I told them we've been here 20 years. Meredith's chest tightened. "Who's behind the proposal?" Elijah tapped the top of the letter. "Carl Dunstan Development Group." The name hit her like a slap. She'd seen it before, in her father's old rulings, and again when she'd researched Elijah's file. Carl Dunstan was a ruthless developer who'd been buying up cheap land across the city. He was the same man her father had once sided with against Elijah's family. And now, decades later, he was coming for Elijah again. "Reverend," she said carefully, "this is serious. Dunstan doesn't make offers. He takes. He chuckled softly. Then we'll pray he finds somewhere else to take from. She shook her head. Prayer is good, but we also need to fight this legally. Let me look into it. He gave her a look both wary and kind. You sure you want to stir that nest, child? That man's got money, friends in high places. I'm a judge, she said firmly. I've seen worse. He smiled at her fire. All right then, but if the fight gets ugly, promise me you won't lose your peace over it. I'll try, she said, though she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. That night, after the shelter quieted, Meredith stayed late in Elijah's tiny office, reading through the legal documents. The shelter's lease had expired months ago, and the renewal papers had never been processed. City Hall could revoke it any time. She felt anger rising, at the city, at Dunstan, and at herself for not catching this sooner. She'd spent years serving the law, but had never truly seen how easily the law could crush people like Elijah. Elijah entered, carrying 2 mugs of tea. You're still working? I can't sleep, she admitted. If Dunstan gets this property, you'll lose everything. He handed her a mug and sat beside her. I've lost things before, he said calmly. Home, family, health. But I learned something, Judge. You only truly lose when you give up being thankful. She looked at him, half frustrated, half in awe. How can you be thankful now? He smiled faintly. Because you're here helping me. 20 years ago, I didn't have anyone in my corner. That's enough reason. Her throat tightened. She sipped the tea to keep from crying. The next morning, Meredith put on her robe and returned to the courthouse. But her mind wasn't on her docket. Between cases, she pulled up the city land records and scanned for any signs of manipulation. Sure enough, Dunstan's company had filed a redevelopment claim for the Carter Street block, complete with forged community consent signatures. Her hands trembled with fury. She knew what this meant. The city planned to demolish the shelter in less than 2 months. She printed the documents and tucked them into a folder. She didn't know how yet, but she would stop him. That evening, she drove to City Hall and requested a meeting with Carl Dunstan himself. He greeted her in his polished suit and easy grin, as if he'd been expecting her. Well, if it isn't the famous Judge Sloan, he said smoothly, gesturing for her to sit. I caught your little viral moment. Quite the PR comeback you've staged. I'm not here for small talk, she said. I'm here about the Carter Street shelter. He smiled, steepling his fingers. Ah, yes. The eyesore we're finally clearing out. Prime location, really. I'm sure you understand. Progress and all that. Those people have nowhere else to go, she said coldly. You can't just take their home. He leaned back. You know how it works, Judge. Permits, codes, ownership. Legally, it's mine. She leaned forward, voice steady but sharp. Legally doesn't mean right, he smirked. You sound just like your father. The words hit harder than he intended. She stiffened, trying not to show it. My father's mistakes won't be mine. Maybe not, he said lightly. But you can't change the past. No, she said, standing. But I can make sure it doesn't repeat itself. That night, she returned to the shelter exhausted but determined. Elijah was sweeping the floor when she walked in. She handed him the folder. Dunstan forged signatures, she said. He plans to tear this place down in 60 days. Elijah set the broom aside, his shoulders sinking slightly. That explains the sudden inspections. She stepped closer. We can fight it, Reverend. I can file for an injunction and reopen the old property case. It won't be easy, but it's possible. He studied her face quietly, then smiled. You remind me of my Mary when she got that fire in her eyes. She sounds like a smart woman, Meredith said softly. She was. Always believed folks could change for the better. Meredith looked down, her voice trembling. "I'm trying." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know." Later, as she left, she saw Elijah cough harshly into a handkerchief. He waved it off with a chuckle when she asked if he was okay, but she noticed the speck of blood on the fabric as he turned away. That image haunted her drive home. She parked in her driveway, engine still running, and whispered, "Lord, give me strength to protect him." The snow had stopped, but the night felt heavy. Somewhere deep inside, Meredith sensed the storm wasn't over. It was just gathering strength. By mid-February, the cold began to lift, and the first hints of spring crept into Sterling Falls. But warmth didn't reach everyone. Least of all, Judge Meredith Sloan, who carried a knot of worry in her chest. The city's plan to demolish the Carter Street shelter loomed closer with every passing day. She'd filed petitions, written letters, and even taken meetings with council members. But every door seemed to close the moment the name Carl Dunstan appeared. Still, she refused to give up. Every night she stayed late at the courthouse, digging through legal archives, trying to find any precedent that could stop him. Elijah had noticed her exhaustion. "You can't win every battle by paperwork, Judge," he said gently one evening while stirring stew. "I know," she said, rubbing her temples, "but I can't just stand by and let them take your shelter." He smiled softly. "Then don't stand by. Stand tall, but do it in faith, not anger." His words sat with her as she drove home through the quiet streets, headlights slicing the night. A week later, the town held its annual Winter Charity Gala, a fancy event where Sterling Falls' wealthiest gathered to pat themselves on the back for their donations. The mayor insisted Meredith attend, partly as public penance, partly to mend her reputation. She almost refused, but Elijah encouraged her to go. "Sometimes the Lord puts you in rooms not to enjoy the food," he said, "but to stir the hearts sitting around the table." So she went. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the old city hall. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the smell of roasted lamb and perfume filled the air. Meredith wore a modest black dress, simple compared to the glittering gowns around her. She felt out of place, like a shadow in a sea of light. At one corner of the room stood a small group of leather-clad men, the Hell's Angels. They looked almost comically out of place among the tuxedos and sequins, but they stood proudly, laughing quietly with Elijah, who wore a clean suit and polished shoes. He had insisted on attending after the mayor sent an invitation, saying it was high time the humble had a seat at the table. When Meredith approached, the room quieted a little. Conversations dimmed. People still remembered her courtroom scandal. She heard whispers. "That's her." The heartless judge. "Oh, she's here with him." But Elijah smiled when he saw her. "Glad you made it, child," he said. "You clean up just fine." "Thank you," she said, trying to hide her nerves. Big Red, the biker leader, handed her a plate. "Don't worry, Judge. You're among friends tonight." She smiled awkwardly, but his kindness steadied her. Midway through the evening, the mayor took the stage. "Before we close," she said, "we'd like to invite Judge Sloan to speak about justice and community. She's been through quite a public journey lately, and we believe she has something to share." Meredith's stomach flipped. This hadn't been in the plan. The room turned toward her. Cameras waited. Elijah gave her a small nod from his seat. His eyes said, "Speak from your heart." So she stood. The microphone felt cold in her hand. She looked over the crowd, the politicians, the donors, the bikers, the veterans. She took a breath and began. "Most of you know who I am," she said, "and what I did." A hush fell over the room. "I mocked a man who asked only for warmth, I spoke from pride, not compassion. I forgot that justice without mercy isn't justice at all. It's vanity." She glanced toward Elijah. He smiled gently, his eyes bright with pride. "I thought power meant control," she continued, "but I've learned something these past months. True power is humility. It's sitting beside someone you once looked down on and realizing they're the one lifting you up." People shifted in their seats, moved by her tone. She could see a few wiping tears. "I stand here tonight not as a judge, but as a woman learning what grace looks like. And I want to say, from the deepest part of me, thank you, Reverend Carter, for showing me what kindness truly means." The room erupted in applause. The sound swelled and echoed off the marble walls. Elijah rose from his seat, wiping his eyes. When the applause died down, he walked to the stage, steady and sure despite his age. He took the microphone gently from her hand. "I ain't got much to add," he said, voice soft but carrying. "Only this, when we see each other through the eyes of grace, we all get a little closer to heaven." The crowd stood, clapping again. Cameras flashed, but this time Meredith didn't mind. She felt light, like a burden had been lifted off her shoulders. After the speech, reporters surrounded her, but she slipped away to the back hallway, needing a moment of quiet. Elijah found her there, leaning against a wall, eyes still wet. "You did good," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted, laughing weakly. "But it felt right." He smiled. Truth usually does. Just then, Big Red appeared with his phone. "Judge," he said, "you better see this." He showed her a breaking news alert. "Fire at Carter Street Veterans Shelter. Firefighters on scene." Meredith's blood ran cold. "No." Elijah's smile faded. "Lord, no." They rushed outside together, the Hells Angels following close behind. Snow was falling again, thick and fast. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Meredith's heels slipped on the icy pavement as she hurried to her car. Big Red shouted, "Follow me," and jumped onto his bike. The roar of engines filled the night. As they sped through the streets, smoke rose above the rooftops like a black scar against the sky. Flames licked the horizon. Meredith gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Please, God," she whispered, "not him, not tonight." When they arrived, the shelter was a nightmare of orange light and chaos. Fire trucks lined the street, hoses hissing steam into the cold air. Residents stood wrapped, in blankets, crying. "Elijah!" Meredith shouted, running through the crowd. "Where is he?" A firefighter pointed towards the ambulance. "We pulled him out. He went back in for someone else." She sprinted toward the flashing lights. Elijah lay on a stretcher, soot smudged on his face, his clothes singed. His eyes fluttered open as she knelt beside him. "Reverend," she whispered, gripping his hand. "You're safe now." He coughed weakly, trying to smile. "Everyone else? Got out?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You did it. You saved them." He nodded faintly. "Good. Then it was worth the smoke." As the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, Meredith turned to see the shelter collapsing in on itself, flames devouring the roof. She stood there, trembling, her heart breaking and hardening at once. Behind her, Big Red put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll rebuild," he said quietly. "For him." She nodded, wiping her tears. "We will." But inside, she knew the fight ahead had just begun. The fire burned through the night. By morning, all that remained of the Carter Street Veterans Shelter was a blackened shell. Charred beams, melted windows, and the faint smell of smoke drifting through the cold February air. Snowflakes fell softly on the ashes, hissing as they landed on the still warm ground. Judge Meredith Sloan stood behind the yellow caution tape, her coat wrapped tightly around her, her face pale. Around her, firefighters packed up their hoses. Reporters gathered in clusters, whispering, cameras flashing. Behind them, a crowd of townspeople watched in stunned silence. Elijah "Doc" Carter had been taken to the hospital hours earlier. Smoke inhalation, the doctors said. His lungs were fragile. His age didn't help. Meredith hadn't left his side until dawn, when the nurses insisted she get some rest. But she couldn't rest. She couldn't leave the ruins of what had been his life's work. Big Red approached, his leather jacket streaked with soot. "You should get some coffee, Judge," he said quietly. "You've been standing here all night." She shook her head. "I can't. Not yet." He followed her gaze toward the smoldering wreck. "We'll rebuild," he said. "Doc wouldn't want us to cry over ashes." Meredith swallowed hard. "He shouldn't have been in there at all. He went back for someone." "Yeah," Big Red said softly. "Kid named Marty. Didn't hear the alarms. Doc found him under a table." He rubbed a hand over his beard. "Fire chief says it was arson. Gasoline traces near the back wall. Someone wanted this gone." Meredith's jaw tightened. She didn't need to ask who. "Carl Dunstan," she said bitterly. "He couldn't get it legally, so he burned it." Big Red's voice turned cold. "If that's true, he picked the wrong man to mess with." Later that morning, Meredith stood outside the hospital's ICU. Machines beeped softly behind the glass where Elijah lay. A breathing tube hooked to his mouth, oxygen lines across his chest. His skin looked gray against the white sheets, but his hands, those same steady hands that once bandaged strangers on the highway, still looked strong. A nurse touched Meredith's arm. "He's stable, ma'am, but he needs rest. You should go home." Meredith nodded but didn't move. "Just 1 minute longer." She sat beside the bed and reached for Elijah's hand. "You're not done yet," she whispered. "You hear me? You've still got work to do." His eyelids fluttered. For a moment she thought he was waking up, but then he only murmured something too faint to hear and settled again. She squeezed his hand. "I'll make this right," she promised. "I swear it." That afternoon, Mayor Evelyn Briggs called an emergency meeting at City Hall. Meredith attended, dressed in her black suit, her hair pulled tight, her grief hidden behind resolve. "We're suspending you from the bench, effective immediately," the mayor said gently. "The media thinks you're too close to the case. This shelter business has become political." "Political?" Meredith said, her voice rising. "A man nearly died, Mayor. That was his life's work. Those people have nowhere to go." The mayor sighed. "I know, but our hands are tied. We're conducting an investigation. Until then, it's best you step back." Meredith laughed bitterly. "Step back? While men like Dunstan burn the world down?" "Careful, Judge," said the city attorney. "That's a dangerous accusation." Meredith leaned forward. "It's not an accusation. It's the truth, and I'll prove it." She stood, gathered her files, and walked out before they could say another word. That night, the town was quiet. A soft snow began to fall again, covering the blackened rubble of the shelter like a blanket of mercy. The Hells Angels had gathered there, working in silence to clean up debris. They built a small wooden cross from the burned planks and planted it near the sidewalk. Someone tied Elijah's old coat around it like a flag. Meredith arrived with a thermos of coffee and a stack of papers. Big Red looked up as she approached. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said. "I'm not," she said, glancing around. "You're here," he grinned faintly. "Fair enough." She handed him the papers. "Copies of the city's permit files. See the signatures at the bottom?" He squinted. "All the same handwriting." "Forged," she said. "I can't prove who did it yet, but it's enough to reopen Elijah's old property case. The one that started all this." Big Red let out a low whistle. "You mean the one your daddy ruled on?" She nodded. "Yes, I'm going to undo what he did." He studied her face. "That's brave." "It's right," she said simply. 2 days later, she stood before a different judge, an old friend named Harold Bishop, filing an emergency motion to review the original Carter property case. Bishop frowned as he read her argument. "This is dangerous ground, Meredith," he said softly. "You're digging into history better left buried." "History doesn't stay buried when it still ruins lives," she replied. He sighed, then nodded slowly. "You've always been stubborn. I'll allow the review." Relief washed over her. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "If you're right, this could expose half the council." "Then let it," she said. That night she returned to the hospital. Elijah was awake, weak but smiling faintly. "Judge," he whispered. His voice was soft, dry like wind through leaves. She took his hand, smiling through tears. "Hey there, you scared us." "Didn't mean to," he murmured. "How bad's the shelter?" She hesitated, then told him the truth. "It's gone, Reverend, all of it." He closed his eyes, breathing shallowly. "Then, we start over." She laughed softly, though her voice shook. "You can barely talk, and you're planning a rebuild?" His eyes twinkled faintly. "Faith don't rest, child." She bowed her head beside the bed. "I'll fight for it, Elijah. For you. For what's right." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Just remember, don't fight from hate, fight from love." Her tears finally fell. "I'll try." He smiled faintly. "Then you'll win." As she left the hospital that night, she stepped into a fresh snowfall. The town was quiet again, its lights reflected on the wet streets. She looked toward the courthouse in the distance, glowing faintly through the fog, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, I start." She didn't know what battles awaited, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not stop until Elijah's shelter rose again, stronger than before. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke through the air, but beneath it, Meredith thought she caught something else. Hope, rising like dawn over ashes. Snow still blanketed the town when Meredith Sloan arrived at the courthouse parking lot before sunrise. The air bit at her cheeks, but she didn't mind. Today was the day they would begin again. Behind her, the sound of motorcycle engines rumbled low and steady, a choir of loyalty. 50 Hell's Angels rode in slow formation, headlights glowing through the mist. They parked in neat rows, stepping off their bikes like soldiers taking position. Big Red waved to her. "Morning, Judge. Ready to build a miracle?" She smiled faintly. "More than ready." Together they began hauling wood and canvas out of a truck. The plan had started the night before in the hospital hallway. Elijah's idea, weakly spoken between breaths. "If the city took our roof, then let's build one where they can see it, right in front of their hearts." By 8 o'clock, the courthouse steps had turned into a construction site. Veterans, church volunteers, bikers, and townsfolk all worked side by side, hammering and sawing. Even the mayor arrived, her eyes wide, speechless at the sight. Meredith stood on the courthouse steps and addressed the growing crowd. "We lost our shelter," she said, voice strong, "but not our purpose. This is a new beginning, a home for anyone who needs one, right here in the open." Applause broke out. Big Red handed her a hammer. "Go on, Judge. Lay the first nail." She did. The sharp clang echoed across the square like a promise. By midday, the open shelter stood proudly, a patchwork of tents and wooden walls warmed by portable heaters. Tables lined the courtyard, covered with soup and blankets. People who had once walked by the homeless now stopped to serve them. Meredith ladled soup beside a young volunteer. Her hands were red from the cold, but she felt alive. For the first time in years, she wasn't enforcing the law, she was living grace. When news crews arrived, the cameras didn't faze her. She spoke simply. "We don't need titles to do good, just hands willing to help." That night, she visited Elijah at the hospital and showed him a photo of the new shelter on her phone. He chuckled weakly, his eyes full of pride. "You did it, child." "No," she said softly. "We did it." He smiled, whispering, "You've built something bigger than a roof." Over the next few days, donations poured in. Food, sleeping bags, even cash from people who'd once doubted her. The town began to change. Businesses opened their doors to the hungry. Strangers greeted each other on the street. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse, Meredith looked over the small village of tents glowing in the orange light. Children laughed near the soup table, and Big Red's men played soft guitar by the fire barrels. She whispered a prayer, not the formal kind she'd learned in church, but a simple one. "Thank you for letting me see people the way you do." For the first time in her life, the courthouse didn't feel like a place of judgment. It felt like home. And though the air was still cold, Meredith could feel warmth spreading. Slow, steady, unstoppable. Within a week, the open shelter drew national attention. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, filming volunteers handing out food and blankets. But not everyone celebrated. Carl Dunstan watched the news from his glass office downtown, anger twisting his face. "She's making a fool of me," he muttered. That night, he called his lawyers, demanding the illegal structure be removed immediately. The next morning, city officials arrived with warnings and clipboards, but they were met by a wall of people. Veterans, bikers, mothers, even children, standing shoulder to shoulder. Meredith faced them calmly. "If helping the needy is a crime," she said, "then write my name first." The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed. Dunstan's men backed away, defeated, for now. As snow began to fall again, Big Red turned to her and said, "Storm's coming, Judge." Meredith nodded, her eyes steady. "Then we'll stand through it." Days later, the courthouse overflowed with people. Veterans in worn coats, bikers with folded arms, townsfolk holding candles, all waiting for the verdict. Judge Harold Bishop presided, his gavel steady but his eyes soft. Meredith stood before him, speaking not as a judge but as a witness to grace. She laid out every fact: the forged signatures, the bribed officials, the fire. The courtroom held its breath. When Bishop finally spoke, his voice echoed through the silence. "This court rules in favor of the Carter Foundation. The property returns to the people it was stolen from." The room erupted in cheers. Meredith turned to find Elijah in a wheelchair near the front, tears glistening in his eyes. "You did it," he whispered. She shook her head gently. "No, Reverend, we did." And for the first time, justice felt like love wearing a robe. Spring unfolded gently over Sterling Falls. The snow had vanished, replaced by bright grass and the scent of new blossoms. Where the Carter Street shelter once stood in ruins, a new building rose, the Doc Carter Veterans Home. Fresh white paint gleamed under the morning sun, and a bronze plaque by the door read, "Faith rebuilds what fire destroys." Meredith Sloan stood at the front steps, greeting townsfolk and volunteers as they carried in boxes of blankets, tools, and food. The sound of laughter echoed through the courtyard, blending with the hammering of last-minute repairs. Every nail, every brick, every cheerful voice was proof of how far they had all come. Big Red walked up beside her, helmet in hand, his beard glinting silver in the light. "You did it, Judge," he said with a proud smile. Meredith shook her head softly. No, Big Red. He did. We just followed his lead. A hush fell as Elijah's wheelchair rolled toward them, pushed by one of the veterans. His skin looked thin and pale, but his smile still carried warmth. Well now, he said, voice rough but bright. I told you we'd see this place rise again. Meredith knelt beside him, her hand covering his. You never stopped believing, Reverend. He chuckled faintly. Faith don't stop. It just catches its breath sometimes. The mayor stepped forward for the dedication ceremony. This home stands because love proved stronger than pride, she said, because one man's kindness changed this whole town. The crowd clapped, some wiping tears. Elijah turned his gaze to the horizon. Do you hear that? He whispered. At first, Meredith heard only the wind. Then it came, the deep, rolling thunder of engines. Down Main Street rode 50 Hell's Angels, their headlights shining like stars against the road. They circled the courtyard slowly, engines growling in reverence. Big Red raised his hand. For Doc, he said simply. The riders revved, their engines once, the sound filling the sky like a benediction. Elijah smiled, his eyes fluttering closed, peace resting on his face. Meredith held his hand tightly and whispered through tears, You're home now. The engines faded into silence, leaving only birdsong and the steady, living heartbeat of a town reborn through love. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.